there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle, a human rights struggle, or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations.
And bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary.
Please tell me, this is We Charge Colonialism. WCC is an organization of Pan-Africanists based in the United States seeking to raise awareness of the fact that the United States government has been colonizing people of African descent. So what we're going to talk about today is something in relation to the topic of We Charge Colonialism. We're going to talk about it in the area of Kamala Harris recently being elected or selected by Joe Biden to be his vice president nominee. Now, before I even get to the colonial aspect of this, let's just talk about the optics as far as Kamala Harris being chosen. I was not surprised at all that Kamala Harris was chosen. I was surprised, if anything, where they started talking about these other black women who were in politics who didn't seem like they were known as much as Kamala. So I was more surprised that they were even considering or talking about these people. Kamala is someone who is of some African ancestry. She is someone who distanced herself in the past from the black community. There are quotes of her saying that she doesn't view herself as, being African or black, but she views herself as being an American. She's also someone who's very moderate. She's someone who has very close alliances with AIPAC. She's shown herself to be someone who's going to be in the middle, essentially. So I was not surprised that she was chosen. If anything, Kamala being chosen was literally like a godsend to all of the black people in the Democratic Party, because a lot of them, you could tell they were still going to vote for Biden regardless. Even no matter how much racist stuff Biden says, they're always going to vote for him because they say a vote against Biden is a vote for Trump or whatever, or a vote not for Biden is a vote for Trump. So they're all going to vote against him. They all want to feel like they're still in the space of liberation, even though they're voting for him. And so people just randomly started saying, well, as long as he picks a black woman, then that will be something that we'll vote for him for. Now, that issue of saying, as long as you pick a black woman, that's something that we have to talk about, because that's really a colonized mind whenever you're saying things like that. If anything, you should be more concerned with the results that you get from that person, whether they're black, yellow, Hispanic, whatever. That should be something that you're more concerned about. But the idea that we should only be concerned with them having black representation, well, black representation hasn't done anything for black people in the past. Black representation as far as black people being elected mayors of cities, black representation as far as black people being elected to Congress, and of course, black representation as occurred under the Obama administration meant nothing for actual black lives. Our quality of life did not change. Laws that were passed did not benefit us. Things that were done behind the scenes were not for our benefit. So black representation has meant nothing. But the idea that we're supposed to vote for something that's not going to mean something should be something that is alarming to us, because we've always been the slaves of this country since we were brought to this country. We've been the slaves of America. And if you're talking about changing from being in the slave position to being a person who is regarded as equal, then I would think that you would want there to be more that you get from the political process than simply representation. Now, the thing about indirect rule was, because it was black people who were the faces of oppression, it was not so easily identifiable that you were at war. And of course, colonialism is an act of war. When you're talking about taking a people or enslaving them, that's an act of war. When you talk about taking the people's resources or the things that they have naturally, such as mineral resources or land, that's an act of war. Previous to colonialism, that's what people did. Whenever they wanted someone's land, whenever they wanted someone's resources, whenever they wanted control over someone's territory, what did they do? They declared war on the people. However, under colonialism, they did not want to declare war. They instead wanted to obtain control without actually having an all-out evident war. But of course, it was still war. So how would they be able to do that? Well, they did so with indirect rule. So I'm going to read from an article on Encyclopedia I'm actually going to read off my phone. And I want you to think while I'm reading this, how similar this sounds to what happens with Black people and different people who are brought into our community to essentially lead us, right? Or to be the politicians of the race who are going to be the democratic establishment. So this is encyclopedia.com. The title of the article is Indirect Rule in Africa. So indirect rule in Africa, although the historiography of indirect rule in Africa is abundant, the subject is still generally misunderstood in origins, meaning, operation, and significance. Historically, imperialist regimes generally controlled and conquered peoples through the agency of the ruling elite. And what do we know about the democratic establishment? It's a ruling elite. These are people who are qualified by going through the system. They're qualified by meeting all the requirements that tend to favor white supremacy. They're qualified as being good enough or exceptional Negroes, as some might say. That is what they are. They're the ruling elite. Now, they did so for practical reasons. While the elite were allowed to reign according to their local laws, customs, and political institutions, they were required to acknowledge the overlord of the conqueror and respect it. Failure to do so resulted in their deposition and replacement with those willing to accept the new dispensation. This is indirect rule broadly defined. There was a degree of cooperation between the colonizer and the colonized, and it is exhibited through various manifestations to suit prevailing circumstances. Indirect rule was not therefore a concept invented by the British colonial administrator Frederick Lugard as the proper system for governing the Islamic immigrants from northern Nigeria. Even in Nigeria, such a system was already in place in the South before Lugard conquered the immigrants. In addition, a warrant chief system, which devised for societies where no centrally recognized authority existed. And that was in operation in Nigeria already. Nevertheless, it was Lugard who modified and popularized indirect rule, elevating it to the status of a political doctrine. A passage in his political memoranda, a set of official instructions to his colonial administrative officers in northern Nigeria states, this is a quote, "There are not two sets of rulers, British and native, working either separately or in cooperation, but a single government in which the native chief have well-defined duties and an acknowledged status equally with the British officers. The duties should never conflict and should overlap as little as possible. The chiefs in sort were not subordinates of or inferiors to the officers, but were agents who cooperated with them in the great civilizing mission." Okay. Scrolling down later, David Cameron, former colonial governor of Tanganyika and Nigeria, respectively, and a Lagardian, explained that it was vital that African institutions, which the chiefs have inherited, molded, or modified as they may do on the advice of British officers, should develop in a constitutional manner. The contradictions inherent in both passages are clear and need no further explanation. The bottom line is that the native chiefs were not independent actors, but rather junior partners in the colonial enterprise who would be dispensed with at the will by the senior partner. The LaGuardian indirect rule, whether of the immigrant or warrant chief variety, was a paternalist concept, replete with irreconcilable contradictions and indeed a convenient fiction necessary for the justification of colonialism. So what is the key things that we need to take note of when we're talking about indirect rule? We're talking about the fact that there is a people who essentially become part of the government, but they're certainly not the ones who are truly in control. When you think about Obama, you would think perhaps the president of the United States was the one behind everything, but we know that he was not. We know that there were people behind him. There were people backing him financially. We know there were people inside of Wall Street. There were people all over who had an interest inside of certain things going a certain way, not just in the Black community, but in the Black community at large, the African community at large. That was what Obama was being sponsored to actually do. So when you look at him doing things that went directly in contradiction of the interest of African people, and when you wake up to the fact that things that happen on an international sphere are equally affecting African people as things that happen domestically. The things that he were doing had absolutely no benefit for our people, and many times were destructive to our people, such as the expansion of things like AFRICOM. So let's understand that we are not being autonomous inside of this realm of politics. When you look at the Democratic Party, whatever people come out who say things that go directly to the Black community, those people are silenced. Whenever people come out and they want to do things that are going to go contrary to the interest of capitalism reigning inside of American society and having a crippling effect on minority communities, those people are done away with. Whether or not you like Bernie Sanders, we can all agree that Bernie Sanders at least had a philosophy that was going to attack the capitalist structure in this country and try to do something to help people who were not the normal beneficiaries of that system. But he was quickly done away with. And we've seen how all of the people got in line behind Biden, like Kamala Harris, like Cory Booker. All these people quickly got behind him whenever it was clear that Bernie could possibly win the election. So I say all this to say, people who are celebrating Kamala Harris as the first Black, first of all, this first Black mentality is a colonial mentality. You should not be celebrating someone for being the first Black something inside of a system that is a white supremacist system. That is literally indirect rule. When you're celebrating, I never celebrate that. The first Black HBCU, blah, blah, blah. The first Black owner of this, the first Black executive. I never celebrate those things because to me, what is the system that this person exists in? Is it a liberating system that they exist in? Is it a system that's going to benefit our people? Or is it a system that's narrowly tailored to perpetuate systemic racism? Let's think about that. So when you're telling me that people are actually celebrating and they're thinking that they can still stand inside of the position of saying that they're for Black liberation, no, let's be very clear. You're still a betrayer of the liberation movement. Anyone who supports like an imperialist is a person who is betraying liberation. Anyone who supports someone who supports the institution of Zionism inside of Israel, that person is a complete betrayal of the ideals of liberation for people. So you can't have it both ways. And those who feel good that it was a Black woman that's chosen, I encourage you to consider why you feel good about that. And actually really consider it, because you're not considering that because it brings any power to Black women. You're considering that a compliment to you because you feel like as a Black woman, you're receiving some type of affirmation from a white supremacist system that has typically not acknowledged you and typically has actually abused you. So that now that your abuser is going to acknowledge you, and you feel good about that, now that your abuser is going to give you some type of nod, you feel good about that, although the abuse is still continuing. This is nothing but a backwards colonist relationship. And anyone who tries to act like their chair for Kamala Harris, knowing that she has backed a lot of policies that went contrary to the Black community, anyone who tries to make her, to romanticize her and make her some type of hero for Black people, even though she clearly has a history that tells you that, number one, she has not clearly identified herself with the Black community, has not gone to the realm of actually claiming that, oh, this is my community. But not only that, but she supports a lot of policies that go completely contrary to our interests. But anyone that's trying to romanticize that or pretend that it's not what it is, question yourself. Question, why is it that you are okay accepting something that does not actualize into a benefit but feels good? Who made it feel good to you to be acknowledged by your oppressor? Who told you that that was something to feel good about? And I would challenge you in that understanding that you are really a victim, whether you acknowledge it or not. It doesn't matter how much education. And it doesn't matter how much education you have. It doesn't matter how much how much you've worked in the community. It doesn't matter. You're still suffering from a colonized mindset. And so all this to say that I do not share this line. And I, if anything, want my people to understand that indirect rule is still being ruled and still being subjugated. It doesn't matter if there's a Black face on it. It doesn't matter if there's a woman face on it. It's still indirect rule and you're still being colonized. So that's all I have for this subject. What are your guys' thoughts? If you want to learn more about WCC, you can email us at wechargecolonialism@gmail.com. If you're interested in joining, you could visit wechargecolonialism.org, and you can also apply to be a member. That's all I have on this. I'll see you guys in the next video. The Justice Bank. So what is the Justice Bank? I've talked before about the fact that we were trying to do a bail project, but we ended up deciding to do a mutual aid fund. The Justice Bank initiative will essentially take members, and if you would pay a very low monthly membership fee. We're going to keep it low on purpose because we are servicing a people who are the most disenfranchised in this country, the most under attack, and it's not reasonable to expect that there's that someone could pay $30 a month, $50 a month, whenever you are of that group. Now, when you become a member, we're going to have a trial period, maybe say after 3 or 6 months, whatever, you are eligible to petition us for help with your expenses. Now, what type of people who are targeted from the prison industrial complex, what type of people would be eligible? Well, because we're doing a mutual aid society, that would be democratic. What we mean is that if you are a member of the Justice Bank, you would have a say in what types of, let's say, charges or offenses that you want to be covered under the Justice Bank. The idea is that all of us are putting our money in collectively because we are a target of the prison industrial complex. Every single day that we walk out, you as a Black person, you are seen as a criminal in this country, and that is a fact. And we want to offer a type of protection for our people, and almost like an insurance policy, honestly, that if you do have some type of run-in with the law, if you do have a charge, a criminal charge, that you can count on a mutual aid society to help you and assist you with those types of charges.
Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about Black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of Black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9.